This lecture is part 1 of the Triumph of the International Style. So the graphic design profession was transformed by the rise of the Swiss style, which set the stage for the emergence of the international typographic style. It really found success in the corporations in the United States, and it kind of parallels the idea of corporate identity, which you all are probably familiar with today. So with the establishment of the Swiss style in the 50s, it sort of changed the way the publicized or the politicized works of De Style, Russian constructivism, Bauhaus, were sort of remade into this neutral idea of commercial communication. So it no longer was political. And really, this begins the concept of the graphic designer as someone who rationally approaches a design problem on behalf of a corporate client. So this really became the beginning of what we know as corporate identity. So after the war, Switzerland became the perfect site in which the international style really gained traction. A small group of designers in the 30s began exploring the new typography and constructivism. Max Bill and Theo Ballmer returned to their country after training in Germany at the Bauhaus, and they really sought to introduce this idea of geometric abstraction to the design community. So this is a piece from Max Bill. The book really doesn't show a lot of his work, and as you can see, this is sort of not the greatest image, but this is just an example of just really integration of image and text in a very simplistic way, but you can kind of still see this idea of grid, minimalism, and just focusing on design and readability. Jan Tschichold, if you remember him from the new typography and the manuals he created about the rules of typography, he was forced to emigrate from Germany and he settled in Switzerland. And really, because of the contempt that the Nazis had for the constructivist style, he was arrested and fired from his teaching position in Munich, which is why he left Germany. And he really started to broaden his ideas and views on typography and started to admire traditional type and layouts. And this is the book that he published in Switzerland, which you can see was mainly set in Bodoni, which sort of broke away from his rules of just using sans serif typography. And in this new book, he continued his support for new typography, but suggested that asymmetric flush left layout was not the only suitable design formula. So kind of breaking away from some of his original strict rules that he imposed. And his relocation to Switzerland took a strange turn. He all of a sudden started publicly denying the principles of new typography that were really so closely attached to his name. And he really, went so far as to say that these really strict rules that he had formulated almost paralleled the dictates of the Nazis. So he was really starting to realize that sometimes those strict rules could be broken. And it really put Tschichold at odds with other designers and critics, as the common wisdom was that the Nazis favored black letter, suppressed geometric abstraction, so really the new typography was the perfect way to convey anti-Nazi modern sophistication. And really, in the 50s and 60s, there was this sense that Swiss culture perfectly fit the rationalism and logic conveyed by geometric abstraction. But Tschichold's views now stated that new typography was aesthetically inferior to older typographic styles, and he began a new career as a designer of Roman type and started to have interests in Chinese manuscripts. This really angered a number of young designers who really felt betrayed by Tschichold, including Max Bill. And many designers in Zurich ignored his new theories and joined a thriving community of designers who were still dedicated to the constructivist principles, which are established in Germany in the 20s. So following the 1920s works of Tschichold, the practitioners of the Swiss style consistently relied on the sans serif type called Accidens Grotesque. And it was a sans serif typeface that had a modern look and still worked really well with photography. And it really represented the perfect compromise for Swiss designers because it conveyed a very functionalist, neutral spirit without it appearing too stylized. And Max Bill was one that used this typeface for his exhibition catalog that was featured in that previous slide that was kind of a bad image. And this is Accidens Grotesque. You can see this image a little more clearly in your textbook. And this was designed by the Berthold Foundry. And I should note that the Swiss style was a renewal of constructivism as universal, but not communist. So the Swiss style was a neutral style based in a neutral capitalist country. So while Accidens Grotesque remained the type choice for most Swiss designers, other newer typefaces made inroads into the international style. And the two new typefaces were called Helvetica and Universe, and you're probably all very familiar with Helvetica. Helvetica actually was a redesign of the Accidens Grotesque. So it was planned by Eduard Hoffmann of the Haas Foundry in Zurich. There's actually an awesome movie called Helvetica, all about the typeface that you should totally check out. And he really kind of was, responding to the popularity of Accidens Grotesque. So one of the salesmen actually in the company, Max Miedinger, created the drawings for this new sans serif that was based on Accidens. Such a hard word to say. It was initially called Neue Haas Grotesque, which again was a mouthful, and just because they wanted to really sell this around the world, they eventually named it Helvetica. So you can see subtle differences between Accidens and Helvetica. You can see that the terminals are a little more angled, and here they are straight, both on the verticals and horizontals. And you can see that it's a little just, all these straight terminals, stopping point, really make this typeface quite beautiful. I know some people have different feelings about Helvetica. I definitely like it. I think it's really well designed. It's kind of one of those typefaces that I don't think anyone will ever be able to make better. And then there's also the Swiss typographer Adrian Frutiger created Universe, which you might have also used at some time, but it really followed the logic of the Swiss style and created these categories that were used to describe type. So he kind of made this weird color-coded diagram that showed the expanded, regular, condensed, super condensed, and displayed numbered weights on the vertical axis and different widths on the horizontal one. So Joseph Müller-Brockmann was an illustrator who converted to the Swiss style in the 50s and really made use of Accidens Grotesque throughout his career. He used it for public signage in his work for the Swiss Automobile Club, and the accident gauge was installed on the plaza by Zurich where it warned the hazards of driving by, showing a numerical summary that highlighted each week's total car-related accidents and deaths, which you can see in this image right here. So these numbers were set in Accidens Grotesque, designed by Joseph Müller-Brockmann. This is one of his famous posters for the Zurich Tonal, which was a classical concert featuring the works of Beethoven. And really, this is the epitome of Swiss style. Carefully regulated curves sweep around an asymmetrically positioned block of text. You can see that this entire composition is based on a grid. Using lowercase type, remember one of the things about the Swiss style is the use of lowercase, and is set low enough on the composition to disrupt any appearance of ordered symmetry. So there's really no symmetry in here at all, and you can see this very strong grid, a sense of visual hierarchy, and really the curves were made up to make an abstract image that were intended to be suggestive of Beethoven's powerful music. This is an ad by Hans Neuberg, And a lot of times Swiss poster designers used hand-drawn elements, but other pursued constructivist typo photo solutions. So this is advertising bouillon, so bouillon cubes, and it's combined sans serif letters with an obliquely shot and cropped photo. You can see that there's a slight tilt to the text also in the photo that really goes against the rigid rectangle of the frame, producing this really interesting asymmetrical kinetic element. This is a poster by El Lissitzky, and you can see that the smiling image of the young woman in the previous poster really recalls many constructivist works back to El Lissitzky poster. So this makes Newberg's poster a great example of an icon of utopian communist workers being transformed into smiling consumers in a capitalist society, which you kind of see here. So there are some interesting connections. You guys have already seen this poster. The magazine Bauen and Wohnen was published in Zurich, which was in the center of the Swiss style in the 40s. It combined sans serif lettering with the orthogonal grid characteristics of the style. So you can kind of see this grid that's created both with the type and the image. And really what you can see here are two very innovative devices that were used for the cover of issue 4 of this catalog. The first is this dramatic contrast in the scale of various photographs, giving the page an evocative rhythmic element as well as hierarchy. So some of these photographs are big, some are small, some are organic with their outline shapes, and some are set in boxes. And the other innovative device was the use of overlapping colors. So these overlapping colors create interesting interconnections between the different parts of the composition. So you can see overlapping colors here, here, even here, sort of going through the woman's face. So this is something that, could show up on a future exam. And there's these really, because of these overlaps, it kind of creates this diagonal axis that nicely complements the strong vertical and horizontal organization, as well as these sort of cut out organic shapes. Mueller-Brockmann also used the same colorful overlap in his typo photo design for Vogue brand grape juice. Isn't it funny? This is for an ad for grape juice. So you can see he took the photograph, but then used these two overlapping colors and split the grid into really two wide verticals. Using accident and grotesque, the text is restricted to the left side of the page while the photograph goes on both sides and it's full bleed. This is really a good example of a functionalist design that really, it's funny, because this is for grape juice, this creates an irrational message to the consumer. So the ad is promoting natural grape juice by using a handsome model driving a car, which is very interesting. In Zurich in 1958, Mueller-Brockmann, Lohse, Newberg, and Carlo Vivarelli founded the journal Neue Grafik, which it translated into New Graphic Design. And it contained articles that summarized the major principles of Swiss style and was really responsible for establishing Switzerland's reputation as the originator of what would become the international style. And you'll hear about this today. I have designer friends that just still use that Swiss style in their modern designs. And the Helvetica movie kind of goes through this as well. The designers limited their design to accident and grotesque, which really appears in only two sizes. So you've got this really big, bold size and this small text size. And one principle of Swiss style at the time was that the designer should never mix typefaces and only should use one or two weights. There's a design firm you should look up called Experimental Jet Set, and they still work in this way. They use the weights to provide a functionalist hierarchy to the viewer, showing by scale what most important parts of the text are. So you can see headline, body text, and they also use a grid of 4 narrow vertical columns. And really the title acts as a horizontal block that establishes the orthogonal grid. So you can see that underlying grid as well. And then we're going to go to Basel, Switzerland. A poster designed by Armin Hoffmann for a theater in Basel is more daring than those of many of his Zurich-based contemporaries, and I'll show you this next. He accepted a position as professor at the AEG, if you remember. These are two words that is very hard to pronounce. And his students made Basel an alternative Swiss style, quote-unquote, scene. So compared to the strict works of the Zurich designers such as Max Bill and Josef Müller-Brockmann, the graphics produced in Basel really appeared a lot more whimsical. And you can see here with his text being set vertically and running downward, so not, it was tilted on its vertical axis, and really violated the rule that text must always run horizontal. There's a really small space between the letters in the photograph, really causing them to overlap each other. And you can see that dot of the letter I also function as an image, as if a flash of light on the dancer's knee. In 1942, Emil Reuter joined the faculty in Basel at the AEG, and this is his poster for an exhibition of French tapestries, which really shows how type can function as image while still maintaining an aspect of abstraction, and he did this by doing this overlap. So the multiple overprintings of the exhibition's title really convey the woven look of the textiles without sacrificing the minimalist aesthetic that at the time symbolized Swiss design. And you probably can't tell here, but Reuter actually used universe for much of his work because he admired Frutiger's new sans serif and wanted to start playing with something a little bit different than the typical Ascaden's grotesque. He also played a role in conceptualizing Swiss style through his work as editor of Typographische Montagsblätter, which was a trade journal in the Printing and Paper Union, and really supported the case for the Swiss style in the content of the publication, and reinstated the case for asymmetrical typography, which at the time was sort of a rebuttal to what Schicholder was starting to say and starting to use more Roman typefaces and symmetrical designs. And he also used universe here as well. So Karl Gerstner studied under Hoffmann and Reuter at Basel and later worked under Max Schmidt, who was the head of design at Geigy, which was a Basel chemical giant, and also a patron of the Swiss style. He created a square format book called the Geigy Hut, which is Geigy today, and was to mark the bicentennial celebration of the company. It was set in Ascaden's grotesque and really was the most comprehensive example of Swiss style produced at the time. And this is the magazine here that you can see. And you can really see this orthogonal grid, the use of color overlays. And remember, this is before the computer was even around. So they had to use color overlays. Every single frame, every single layer of this would have had to have been a separate color, a separate piece of film. And using text diagrams, photographs, and arrows, they created a book that was both beautiful as well as easy to understand. This is a poster by Nelly Rudin, and as it was the case at Bauhaus and other schools in the time, women were not necessarily welcomed as students or practitioners of the Swiss style. If you remember from Bauhaus, women were sort of told they should do weaving or fiber or basketry. But in 1958, which was SAFA, which was the Swiss Women's Exhibition, provided a public stage for some female graduates of the Basel Gewerbeschule. Again, I'll try to pronounce this, but pronounce this as you will. And Nelly Rudin was one of the students, and she produced this poster that juxtaposes a photograph of a contemporary woman with an ancient fertility figure, which you can see right here. This is an asymmetrical design which was based on a grid, and the abstract design visually reinforces the exhibition's credo, Swiss women, their life, their work. And you can kind of see that the eye sort of goes around from the fertility statue to the modern woman. And And this expanding green path is also a metaphor demonstrating the increasing role of women in society through the shape's increasing scale. While the Swiss style grew in stature as publications spread the gospel, so a lot of publications came out talking about Swiss design, some critics emerged who felt the style had become too inflexible as its international reputation grew. So some designers practiced the Swiss style, which really lacked that sort of chaotic thread that originally tied Russian constructivist design to the innovations of Dada and Futurism. People who defended the Swiss style portrayed it as a responsible set of professional principles, so more a set of rules rather than a style. But the work that emerged in Switzerland soon became an international phenomenon that swept across Europe and United States. So in the 50s was really when the idea of corporate identity first emerged. In the post-war period, the majority of large multinational corporations felt the need to present a unified design front to the consumer. So Germany, as a center for the post-war graphic design, grew in the city of Ulm. And the people there are names that you should recognize: Max Bill, Otto Eicher, and Ing Scholl, founded the HFG, or University of Design, in 1951. Max Bill, who was the first director of the school, was Swiss and really played a large role in originating the Swiss style. So the products created at the Ulm School had a precisely measured grids, crisp geometric forms, and used sans serif type. So what separated the professors and the students was the concern for the theoretical dimension of graphic design. So they were consistently trying to bring the most advanced sort of philosophical issues into the classroom. So as Europe got back on its feet, German graphic designers really found a lot of opportunities designing logos for these corporations that's starting to emerge. So this is a 1969 logo that Otto Eicher designed for Lufthansa, which was the German airline at the time. And he made Helvetica the standard face for the airline's name. Anton Stankowski, who did teach at the HFG, designed this logo for the Deutsche Bank. And you can see this slash and square emblem really displays the formal rigor of the 20s constructivism and attempts to create an abstract vision of timeless strength and security. So you really started to see designers designing not only the logo type, but symbols and pictograms as well. So banks really started turning into this new timeless international style so that their logos would never need to be recreated or reproduced. They would just stand the test of time. Stankowski and Eicher played important roles in the design of the 1972 Munich Olympics. Eicher made the most significant contribution in the area of information design, creating a system of pictograms that were intended to be understandable to everyone. So no matter what country you came from, you would be able to understand these icons for cycling, swimming, soccer, etc. And they really were just made up of simple lines and circles which were superimposed on a grid, and all the icons were easily identifiable. In the Netherlands, Wim Krauw was the foremost practitioner of the international style, and he had been recognized for his type design. So he was a type designer, but also creative graphics for the Dutch postal system and Amsterdam's museum, which really gained him the most fame. And you can see here this style look with the yellow, reds, and blues on his stamp. His English language poster for the Stedelijk from 1975 publicized the museum's collection of work from the Dutch avant-garde group De Stijl. You can see this grid-based arrangement, which expresses the timeless universal sensibility which was favored by designers of the international style, and a lot of them did come from the De Stijl movement. And you can see that his typeface is sans serif, or what some people would call grotesque, and really echoes the composition of Mondrian's painting. In the UK, type and graphic design professionals up to the 60s were generally still remaining conservative. So Stanley Morrison was the best known typographer and typographical historian in England, dominated the scene with his commitment to finely crafted traditional typefaces as well as his numerous publications. He engineered the revival of a number of classical typefaces such as Baskerville, Fournier, and became the typographic consultant to the Monotype Corporation, and his influence and good judgment helped make Monotype the dominant mechanical typesetting system in Britain. And again, remember, this is still before the computer. So he held two other key positions during his career. He was the chief book designer for the Cambridge University Press, as well as a consultant to the newspaper, The Times of London. And this is a terrible image, and it's really hard to see, but he introduced the new typeface for the newspaper, Times New Roman, as part of a general redesign. I am sure all of you have heard of Times New Roman. It's like the default serif typeface, and I don't know about you, but I try never to use the typeface just because it's just, completely, I consider it like toast. And it's really, because it's extremely narrow proportioned serif, it was designed to save space, enhance legibility, it had a very high X height, and it was produced by Monotype for this newspaper. Having rejected the dogmatic assertions of the new typography, Shishold actually accepted a position at Penguin Books of London in 1947. Penguin Publishing was the first commercially successful paperback book company of Britain, and as its designer, Shishold inherited this situation when he came to Penguin, whose editions had been typeset and designed by a huge range of people, so the designs were kind of all over the place. He didn't put in a dogmatic set of rules like he did earlier, but he encouraged book designers to use a wide variety of typefaces. He did insist that each run follow the principles of good design, so he did still sort of maintain that role as art director. And his most enduring contribution to Penguin was a leaflet called Penguin Composition Rules. It was just a 4-page essay, and he really demanded that Penguin's designers followed standardized principles for all aspects of layout and typography. Some of his rules included things such as all text composition should be closely word spaced as possible, white spaces should be avoided, words may be freely broken whenever necessary. As you know, the most important things was the appearance of the page, not a lot of space between words. So he also designed many of the covers. This is one of his covers for Dante's The Divine Comedy. Very, what would be seeming as conventional, combining a small woodcut with the typography. It's a well-balanced composition that is immediately legible to the viewer. He standardized the design for Penguin's various book series, and The Divine Comedy is a fine example of the basic elements he devised for Penguin Classics. What's really interesting here is he really broke his rules. Everything is symmetric. But, really he brought to fruition the vision that had been tried, not successfully, by William Morris, to bring more really well-made ordinary books to the public. During this period, England had a handful of designers devoted to modern styles, including the typographer Herbert Spencer. Through his own work on the journal Typographica, he sought to promote the geometric abstract style in England. And he did so because of his acquaintance with Max Bill. He promoted the Swiss style well into the 1990s. So this was one of his covers for Typographica #1. And you can see that he was pretty eclectic rather than dogmatic, and really was more committed to the work of the 1920s. This really kind of looks more Dada, more avant-garde. You can still see Typographica, the title, in off-center set in the sans serif typeface, but there's still a lot of chaos with the other letters kind of floating around the layout. Alan Fletcher was a British graphic designer who made the most visible contribution to the international style in England. He studied at the Central School of Art and Design in London, but also came to the U.S. and studied at Yale University. He established the firm Fletcher, Forbes & Gill in 1962. And this is his logo for Reuters, which was a London-based news agency, made up of 84 dots. It was supposed to sort of visualize the contemporary teleprinter tape, which was arranged in a grid, and the logo was to be matched with a range of other new designs, including computer terminal. In 1972, Fletcher, Forbes, and Crosby became the core of the famous collaborative design partnership Pentagram. While a partner at Pentagram, he designed his renowned logo for the Victorian Albert Museum that is still in use today. It's not based on a sans serif, but on Bodoni. The serif of the ampersand acts as the crosspiece of the letter A, which itself is made up of a combination of positive and dynamically activated negative space. So you can really see this beautiful integration between the ampersand and the vertical or the diagonal stem of the A. And this is the end of part 1, so your next lecture will be part 2.